Karoline Leavitt sat in the worn wooden chair of courtroom 7B, her hands folded neatly on the polished table before her. The air smelled of furniture polish and anxiety. At 27, she was the youngest press secretary the campaign had ever hired, a fact that filled her with both pride and occasional doubt. Today, those doubts crept closer as she represented her employer in what should have been a straightforward permit dispute. The courtroom buzzed with the usual morning activity. Lawyers shuffling papers, clerks whispering to each other. The court reporter testing her equipment with soft clicks. Karoline checked her watch. 9:30 exactly. Right on cue, the bailiff's voice boomed through the room. All rise for the Honorable Judge Richard Harmon. Everyone stood as Judge Harmon entered, his black robe flowing behind him like a shadow. At 62, his face was a map of deep lines and stern expressions, crowned by steel gray hair cut military short. He'd served on the bench for nearly 20 years and had earned a reputation for being tough but fair. At least, that's what Karoline had been told during her preparation. Judge Harmon settled into his chair, adjusted his glasses, and scanned the room. His gaze paused when it reached Karoline. "First case," he announced, his voice gravelly from decades of speaking in courtrooms. The clerk handed him a file, which he opened with practiced efficiency. "Campaign permit application for downtown event space," he read aloud. "I see we have..." He squinted at the paperwork. "Karoline Leavitt, representing the applicant?" Karoline stood, smoothing her navy blue skirt suit. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge stared at her for a long moment, his expression darkening. "Ms. Leavitt, are you even old enough to be in my courtroom without a school permission slip?" A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. Karoline felt heat rise to her cheeks but kept her expression neutral. "I'm 27, Your Honor, and fully qualified to represent my employer in this matter." Judge Harmon leaned forward. 27? Good Lord, they're sending children to do adult work now. He shook his head and flipped through the file. I suppose they couldn't find anyone with actual experience to handle something this simple? The courthouse fell silent. This wasn't the usual courtroom banter or even the typical sternness judges sometimes displayed. This was something else, something personal and inappropriate. Karoline could feel every eye in the room on her. "Your Honor, I've been handling the campaign's public permits for over 2 years," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I'm very familiar with the process and regulations." 2 whole years? Judge Harmon's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Well, that certainly qualifies you to waste this court's time." He slapped the file down. "What's next? Will they send the intern to argue before the Supreme Court?" Karoline's lawyer, Tom Chen, stood up beside her. "Your Honor, I must object to this line of—" "Sit down, counselor," Judge Harmon snapped. "I'm addressing Ms. Leavitt." Tom hesitated, then slowly sank back into his chair, shooting Karoline an apologetic look. The judge turned his attention back to Karoline. "Let me guess, Ms. Leavitt. First in your class at some overpriced university where daddy's money bought you a spot?" The accusation hung in the air. Karoline's hands trembled slightly, but she pressed them firmly against the table to hide it. She thought of her father, a plumber who'd worked double shifts to help pay for her education, and her mother who cleaned hotel rooms on weekends for extra money. "Actually, Your Honor," she said quietly, "I attended State University on academic scholarship and worked 2 jobs to cover my expenses." For a moment, something flickered across Judge Harmon's face. Embarrassment, perhaps, but it quickly hardened back into contempt. "Well, scholarship or not, it seems they failed to teach you proper preparation for court appearances. This application," he waved the papers, "is missing the traffic impact assessment required under Local Ordinance 47.3. Karoline frowned. She knew that ordinance by heart. "Your Honor, that ordinance was amended last year. For events expecting fewer than 5,000 attendees, a simplified traffic statement is sufficient. It's included on page 7. Judge Harmon's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Are you suggesting I don't know the laws in my own courtroom, Ms. Leavitt?" "No, Your Honor. Simply clarifying the current regulation." The judge slammed his gavel down suddenly, making everyone jump. "Don't you dare try to lecture me on the law, you presumptuous child. This court is not some college classroom for you to show off in." A woman in the back of the courtroom gasped audibly. The court reporter's fingers hovered uncertainly over her machine. Even the bailiff looked uncomfortable. "Your Honor," Karoline began, fighting to keep her voice steady. "With all due respect—" "Respect?" Judge Harmon interrupted, his voice rising. "You want to talk about respect? How about the respect due to this court, which you've wasted time with your inadequate preparation and your attitude? How about the respect due to my position, which I've held since before you were learning your ABCs?" Karoline stood perfectly, still, feeling as though the floor might give way beneath her. This wasn't just unprofessional, it was cruel and personal. Nothing in her training had prepared her for this kind of attack. "Application denied," Judge Harmon declared, scribbling on the form. "Reapply when you can find someone competent to handle it. Next case." The gavel came down with a crack that seemed to echo through Karoline's bones. She gathered her papers with shaking hands, avoiding eye contact with the pitying looks from those around her. "I'm so sorry," Tom whispered as they collected their things. "I've never seen him like this. It was completely inappropriate." Karoline nodded, unable to trust her voice. She felt humiliated, angry, and confused all at once. What had she done to deserve such treatment? Was it her age, her gender, something else entirely? As they walked toward the exit, Karoline noticed several people watching her, some with sympathy, others with curiosity. A few were whispering behind their hands. "Great," she thought. "I'll be courthouse gossip by lunchtime." In the hallway outside, Tom touched her elbow gently. "I need to check something with the clerk. Will you be okay for a few minutes?" "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile. "I'll wait by the water fountain." As Tom disappeared back into the courtroom, Karoline leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths to steady herself. The marble corridor was cool against her back, grounding her. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. "He's been like that all week," a voice said nearby. Karoline's eyes snapped open. A young man in a court, officer's uniform, and an older woman in a clerk's blazer stood a few feet away, talking in hushed tones. They hadn't noticed Karoline. "It's getting worse," the clerk whispered. "Yesterday he made a defense attorney cry." "Do you think it's those payments?" the officer asked, glancing around nervously. "I overheard something in his chambers about—" The clerk nudged him sharply, noticing Karoline. "Not here," she hissed. They moved away quickly, their conversation fading as they rounded the corner. Karoline remained frozen in place, replaying the words in her mind. Payments? What payments? Her political instincts, honed by years of campaign work, began to stir. There was something happening here beyond a judge having a bad day. The bizarre overreaction, the whispered conversation, the nervous glances, it all pointed to something bigger. Karoline pulled out her phone and began typing notes while the exchange was fresh in her mind. Maybe there was nothing to it. Maybe Judge Harmon was just having a terrible week. But maybe, just maybe, his attack on her wasn't random at all. As Tom returned, looking frustrated, Karoline slipped her phone back into her pocket. She'd been taught by her campaign mentors to trust her gut, and right now her gut was telling her to dig deeper. "Ready to go?" Tom asked. "Actually," Karoline said, a new determination steadying her voice, "I think I need to stay a little longer. There's something I want to check." Tom looked at her curiously. "What are you thinking?" Karoline smiled slightly, the first genuine expression since entering the courthouse. "I'm thinking that Judge Harmon picked the wrong person to insult today." Karoline walked slowly through the courthouse hallway, her mind racing faster than her feet could carry her. The marble floors echoed with each step, almost like they were counting out a rhythm for her thoughts. She needed to find out more about what the court officer had mentioned, those mysterious payments that might explain Judge Harmon's bizarre behavior. She spotted a water fountain and stopped for a drink, using the moment to scan her surroundings. The courthouse was busy but not crowded. Various doors lined the corridor, each leading to different departments that kept the justice system running. Where should she start? "You look like you could use this more than me," said a voice. Karoline turned to find a woman about her age holding out a chocolate bar. She wore a courthouse ID badge that read, "Lisa Donovan, Legal Assistant." "That obvious, huh?" Karoline accepted the chocolate with a grateful smile. "I was in there," Lisa said, nodding toward courtroom 7B. "What Judge Harmon did was totally out of line. Everyone's talking about it." Karoline broke off a piece of chocolate. "Has he always been like this?" Lisa looked around before answering, lowering her voice. "No, that's the weird thing. He used to be tough but fair. The last few months, though, complete personality change, especially with cases involving downtown properties." Karoline's interest piqued. "Downtown properties? Like the permit I was applying for?" "Exactly like that," Lisa confirmed. "Anything touching downtown development gets his special attention lately. Not in a good way." Karoline hesitated, then decided to take a chance. "I overheard someone mention payments." Lisa's eyes widened. She grabbed Karoline's arm and pulled her toward a quiet corner near the stairwell. "You didn't hear that from me, okay? But there are rumors Judge Harmon's son opened a fancy restaurant last year. Cost over $1 million to set up. Nobody can figure out where the money came from. And the son was broke before that." Lisa nodded. "College dropout, couldn't hold a job. Then suddenly he's a restaurant owner in the expensive part of town. Around the same time, Judge Harmon started ruling in favor of Reed Capital on every case." Reed Capital? The name sounded familiar to Karoline. Big real estate developer. They're buying up half of downtown, turning old buildings into luxury apartments. Your permit was for a campaign event in Fletcher Square, right? Reed wants that. A whole block. The pieces started clicking together in Karoline's mind. Her campaign had chosen Fletcher Square specifically because it was a public space at risk of private development. A perfect backdrop for their candidate's speech about affordable housing. "Is there any proof of these connections?" Karoline asked. Lisa glanced at her watch. "I need to get back to work, but if you're really interested." She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Check the public records room, 4th floor. Ask for the Reed Capital property applications from the past year, and maybe look into case number TC 29875. Before Karoline could ask more, Lisa hurried away, her court shoes clicking rapidly down the hall. Karoline found the elevator and pressed the button for the 4th floor. Her heart was beating faster now, not from fear but from the familiar rush of following a lead. Before joining the campaign, she'd worked briefly as a local reporter. Those investigative instincts never really went away. The public records room was quieter than the rest of the courthouse, with just a few people hunched over documents at wooden tables. An older man with round glasses sat behind the main desk looking bored. "Can I help you?" he asked as Karoline approached. "I hope so. I need to see Reed Capital's property applications from the past year, and information on case TC 29875 if possible." The man's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't comment. "Fill out these request forms. I'll need your ID." 20 minutes later, Karoline sat at a table with several folders spread before her. Most contained standard property applications, boring but legal requests to convert old buildings into new developments. But as she compared dates and decisions, a pattern emerged. Every Reed Capital application had been approved, even when they requested exceptions to zoning laws. And every approval had Judge Harmon's signature. Then she opened the file for TC 29875. It was a civil case where a small business owner had sued Reed Capital, claiming they'd used fraudulent tactics to force her to sell her downtown shop. Judge Harmon had dismissed the case before it even went to trial, citing lack of evidence. Karoline was so absorbed in reading that she didn't notice someone approaching until a shadow fell across her papers. Finding anything interesting, she looked up to see a man in his 50s wearing a courthouse security badge. His name tag read Bill Peterson. "Just doing some research," Karoline replied cautiously. Bill smiled. "On Reed Capital and Judge Harmon. Not exactly light reading." Karoline began gathering the papers, suddenly worried she'd attracted the wrong kind of attention. "Relax," Bill said, sitting down across from her. "I'm not here to stop you. Actually, I've been hoping someone would start asking questions." "What do you mean?" Bill leaned forward. "I've worked courthouse security for 12 years. I see everything that happens here. About 8 months ago, I started noticing Judge Harmon having regular meetings with a man named Vincent Reed. The owner of Reed Capital? The very same. Not in his chambers, though. They'd meet in the parking garage or sometimes at a coffee shop 2 blocks away. Always off the record." Karoline felt a chill run down her spine. "You saw this personally?" Bill nodded. "With my own eyes. Then last month I was working late. Judge Harmon had forgotten his glasses in his chambers, so I brought them to him as he was getting in his car. He had his trunk open and I saw something I shouldn't have." "What was it?" Karoline asked, barely breathing. "A briefcase. It fell over when he opened the trunk, and bundles of cash spilled out. More money than I'll see in 5 years. Bill's voice had dropped to a whisper. "He saw me looking. Next day I was reassigned to entrance security away from his courtroom." Karoline's mind was racing again. "Have you told anyone else about this?" "Who would believe me? It's my word against a respected judge." Bill stood up. "But maybe they'd believe her." He slid a business card across the table. The name on it read, "Diane Winters, Assistant District Attorney." "She's been trying to build a case against Reed for years," Bill explained. "Rumor is she's got a grand jury looking into corruption, but no smoking gun. Maybe what happened to you today could help." Karoline stared at the card. This had escalated quickly from a humiliating court experience to something much bigger. "Why, are you telling me this?" she asked. Bill's face hardened. "My brother lost his restaurant to Reed Capital's developments. Judge Harmon threw out his lawsuit too. Some things matter more than a paycheck." After Bill left, Karoline sat quietly, thinking. She had connections of her own, people who might help her verify this information before she took it further. There was her old journalism professor, who now worked at the city newspaper's investigative desk, and her college roommate who'd joined the FBI after graduation. She carefully took photos of the key documents with her phone, making sure to capture all the relevant signatures and dates. Then she returned everything to the records clerk and headed downstairs. As she reached the main floor, Karoline spotted a familiar figure near the courthouse entrance, Judge Harmon himself, talking to a well-dressed man she didn't recognize. The judge was smiling and relaxed, nothing like the angry man who'd humiliated her hours earlier. Karoline ducked behind a column, watching as the 2 men shook hands. The stranger passed something to Judge Harmon, a folded newspaper, but as the judge tucked it under his arm, Karoline caught a glimpse of what looked like an envelope inside. She quickly snapped a photo with her phone, trying to be discreet. But in her nervousness, she forgot to silence the camera sound. The distinctive click seemed to echo through the lobby. Judge Harmon's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the area. Karoline turned away quickly, pretending to check her phone, her heart hammering in her chest. "Ms. Leavitt?" She froze. Judge Harmon was walking toward her, his face a mask of suspicion. "What a surprise seeing you still here," he said, his voice cold. "I thought my ruling was quite clear." Karoline forced herself to meet his gaze. "Just wrapping up some paperwork, Your Honor. Always more forms to fill out." The judge studied her. Face, "Oh, indeed. Bureaucracy never sleeps." He gestured to the main doors. "Don't let me keep you." It was a dismissal, but also felt like a warning. Karoline nodded politely and walked toward the exit, feeling his eyes on her back the entire way. Outside, the afternoon sun felt like freedom. Karoline took a deep breath, then pulled out her phone and the business card Bill had given her. She had decisions to make, big ones. As she walked to her car, she dialed a number from her contacts. "Hey, it's me," she said when her friend answered. "Remember how you said the FBI's public corruption unit is always looking for solid leads? I think I might have something they'd want to see." The evening air felt cooler than usual as Karoline sat at an outdoor table of the Blue Kettle Cafe, checking her watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. Her coffee had gone cold, but she barely noticed. Her mind was too busy replaying the events of the past 24 hours. The humiliation in Judge Harmon's courtroom, the whispered conversations, the documents she'd found, and Bill's shocking revelations. "Sorry I'm late," a voice said, pulling her from her thoughts. Karoline looked up to see her old college roommate, Tanya Wilson, sliding into the chair across from her. Tanya had changed since their university days. Her previously casual-style repla, said with a crisp blazer and practical haircut that screamed federal agent, but her warm smile was exactly the same. "Thanks for meeting me," Karoline said, keeping her voice low despite the relative privacy of their corner table. "I wasn't sure if you'd come." Tanya signaled to a waiter for coffee before turning her attention fully to Karoline. "Your message sounded serious. Something about judicial corruption." Her tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "I think I've stumbled onto something big," Karoline said, then proceeded to tell Tanya everything, from the judge's bizarre outburst to the documents linking him to Reed Capital, and finally, Bill's account of seeing cash in the judge's car. Tanya listened without interruption, her expression giving nothing away. When Karoline finished, she sipped her newly arrived coffee and remained silent for nearly a minute. "You realize what you're suggesting, right?" Tanya finally said. "Accusing a federal judge of taking bribes is about as serious as it gets." "I know, and you have no actual proof, just coincidences and the word of a security guard who might have his own grudge." Karoline felt a flash of disappointment. "I thought you'd believe me." Tanya reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I do believe you, but believing isn't enough for the Bureau to open an investigation into a sitting judge. We need something concrete." "So that's it? He just gets away with it?" Karoline couldn't keep the frustration from her voice. "I didn't say that." Tanya glanced around, then lowered her voice even further. "The Public Corruption Unit has actually had Reed Capital on its radar for months. There have been rumors about their influence over local officials, but nothing solid enough for warrants." Hope flickered in Karoline's chest. "And Judge Harmon?" "Not specifically, no. But what you've told me creates an interesting connection." Tanya pulled out her phone, typed something quickly, then put it away. "I'm going to bring this to my supervisor unofficially. No promises, but it might be enough to justify a closer look." "What can I do to help?" Karoline asked. Tanya's expression turned serious. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. If there is corruption happening, these people won't hesitate to protect themselves. Your job hunt story was smart. Stick with that if anyone asks why you're looking into court records." Karoline nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead. She hadn't told Tanya about the photos she'd taken of Judge Harmon receiving what appeared to be an envelope from the unknown man. It wasn't definitive proof of anything, but it might be a start. "There's one more thing," Tanya added, interrupting Karoline's thoughts. "If, and that's a big if, my supervisor thinks this is worth pursuing, we might need your help later. Would you be willing to make an official statement?" "Of course," Karoline replied without hesitation. The next 3 days passed in a blur. Karoline went through the motions of her regular work duties at the campaign office, all while waiting for word from Tanya. She jumped every time her phone buzzed, but heard nothing. In the meantime, she couldn't resist doing some investigating of her own. Using her press secretary credentials, she requested public records on Reed Capital's development projects and began creating a timeline of Judge Harmon's rulings. She was careful, using her lunch breaks or after-work hours, making sure nobody from the campaign noticed her extracurricular research. On the 4th day after meeting Tanya, Karoline was working late at the campaign headquarters, alone, except for the nighttime security guard. Her phone rang with an unknown number. "Hello?" She answered cautiously. "It's me." Tanya's voice came through. "Don't use names. Are you somewhere private?" Karoline moved to the empty conference room and closed the door. "I am now. What's happening?" "We're moving forward," Tanya said, her voice tight with what sounded like excitement. "Your information checked out. The restaurant owned by our mutual friend's son. The financing came through a shell company that traces back to Reed Capital. It's a textbook bribe disguised as a business investment. Karoline felt her pulse quicken. So what happens now? We need more. Specifically, we need to catch them in the act. My team thinks they can get approval for surveillance, but it could take weeks. In the meantime, we need to know if there are any upcoming cases involving Reed Capital in our friend's courtroom. Karoline thought for a moment. I might be able to find out. The legal assistant I met, Lisa, she seemed to know a lot about the court schedule. Be careful, Tanya warned. Don't let anyone know you're asking. After hanging up, Karoline sat in the dark conference room weighing her options. Contacting Lisa again could be risky, but the alternative was waiting weeks for the FBI to cut through bureaucratic red tape. The next morning, Karoline arrived at the courthouse dressed in a simple blouse and skirt, carrying a folder of papers, to look like she had official business. She'd spent an hour rehearsing her story. She was following up on a different permit application, nothing to do with the case Judge Harmon had rejected. She spotted Lisa at her desk in the clerk's office, typing rapidly on a computer. Taking a deep breath, Karoline approached. Excuse me, Lisa. We met the other day. I'm Karoline Leavitt. Lisa looked up, recognition and surprise crossing her face. The press secretary Judge Harmon went off on. Hard to forget. What brings you back here? Karoline gave her most disarming smile. Actually, I'm hoping you can help me with a different permit application, completely unrelated to Fletcher Square. Lisa seemed to relax. Sure, what do you need? I'm trying to avoid another disaster, Karoline said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Is there a way to check which judges are assigned to which areas? I'd rather not end up in front of Judge Harmon again. Smart thinking, Lisa replied with a small laugh. She turned to her computer. Judges are assigned randomly, but their current caseloads are public record. Let me pull that up for you. As Lisa scrolled through the system, Karoline casually asked, I've been curious. Does Judge Harmon handle a lot of property disputes? He seemed to have strong opinions about downtown development. If Lisa suspected anything, she didn't show. Empty. He gets his share. Actually, there's a big one coming up next week. Reed Capital is trying to force out some tenants from the Riverside apartments to convert the building to luxury condos. Reed Capital again, Karoline murmured, trying to sound merely interested rather than alarmed. They seem to be involved in a lot of controversial projects. Lisa glanced around, then lowered her voice. Between us, they always win. Always. Especially in Judge Harmon's courtroom. She tapped a few more keys. Here's the case number for the Riverside hearing, TC 31092, scheduled for next Wednesday at 10 a.m. That's very helpful, thank you, Karoline said, writing down the information. As she turned to leave, Lisa called after her. Hey, did anything ever come from those records you were looking at last time? About Reed Capital? Karoline froze, then forced herself to turn back casually. Oh, that was just background research for a campaign speech. Nothing exciting. Lisa nodded, but something in her expression had changed. A hint of suspicion or maybe concern. Well, be careful with that research. Reed Capital has powerful friends. The warning hung in the air between them. Karoline thanked her again and left quickly, fighting the urge to look back over her shoulder. Outside, she ducked into a coffee shop and called Tanya. I have something, she said as soon as Tanya answered. Reed Capital has a case in Harmon's court next Wednesday. They're trying to evict tenants from an apartment building. That could be perfect, Tanya replied, excitement evident in her voice. We might be able to set up surveillance before then. Get ready for another call soon. The call came that evening as Karoline was driving home. This time it wasn't just Tanya but her supervisor at the FBI, Special Agent Ray Henderson. Ms. Leavitt. His deep voice filled her car through the Bluetooth speaker. Agent Wilson speaks highly of your information. We're prepared to move forward with a limited operation, but we need your help. Whatever you need, Karoline said, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. We'd like you to attend that hearing next Wednesday, Henderson explained. Your presence might trigger another reaction from Judge Harmon, which could be valuable to observe. More importantly, we need someone who can legally be in that courtroom to wear a recording device. Karoline felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. You want me to wear a wire? Isn't that dangerous? It's not like in the movies, Tanya chimed in. The device is tiny and undetectable. You'd just be there as an observer. The goal is to record any unusual behavior or biased rulings, not to confront anyone. If Judge Harmon is taking bribes from Reed Capital, Henderson added, seeing you in his courtroom again might make him nervous. People make mistakes when they're nervous. Karoline thought about it. The idea was frightening, but also exciting. And if Judge Harmon really was corrupting the justice system for personal gain, someone needed to stop him. I'll do it, she said finally. Tell me what I need to know. Come to the federal building tomorrow at noon, H. Henderson instructed. We'll brief you properly and get you fitted with the recording equipment. Remember, Ms. Leavitt, from this moment on, you're working with the FBI on an active corruption investigation. Complete discretion is essential. As Karoline pulled into her apartment complex, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear certainly, but also a sense of purpose stronger than anything she'd felt in years. She had started this journey seeking simple justice for herself after a public humiliation. Now she was part of something much bigger. 1 week, she whispered to herself as she turned off the engine. 1 week until we find out if Judge Harmon is as corrupt as we think he is. The federal building stood tall against the cloudless blue sky, its windows reflecting the morning sunlight like thousands of tiny mirrors. Karoline adjusted her blazer for the 5th time as she approached the security checkpoint, trying to appear calm despite the nervous energy coursing through her body. She showed her ID to the guard, passed through the metal detector, and followed the directions to a small conference room on the 4th floor. Tanya was waiting for her, along with Special Agent Henderson and a technical specialist introduced only as Mike. The room had no windows, just blank walls and a table that had seen better days. Right on time, Tanya said, giving Karoline an encouraging smile. Ready for this? As ready as I'll ever be, Karoline replied, setting her purse down on the table. Henderson wasted no time on pleasantries. Let's get started. Mike will show you the recording equipment while I explain exactly what we need from you. Mike opened a small black case to reveal what looked like an ordinary pen. Latest technology, he said, his voice full of pride. Microphone, battery, and storage all in one. Records for up to 8 hours. Audio quality is excellent. He handed the pen to Karoline, who turned it over in her hands. It felt slightly heavier than a normal pen, but otherwise looked completely ordinary. That's it? Just a pen? That's it, Mike confirmed. Clip it to your notepad or keep it in your jacket pocket. Just make sure the top end isn't covered. That's where the microphone is. Henderson spread a folder of documents on the table. Now for your role. The Riverside Apartments case is scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. You'll attend as an observer, nothing more. We don't want you to do anything that might jeopardize the case or put yourself at risk. What exactly am I listening for? Karoline asked. Anything unusual? Tanya explained. Biased language, special treatment for Reed Capital's attorneys, inappropriate remarks. Based on your experience, you'll recognize if Judge Harmon is acting unfairly. Henderson nodded. We already have agents looking into the financial connections between Reed Capital and Judge Harmon's son's restaurant. What we need now is evidence of bias in his official capacity. Karoline picked up the pen again, feeling the weight of responsibility it represented. And if he recognizes me and reacts badly again? That might actually be helpful, Henderson said. If he shows inappropriate bias against you personally, it strengthens our case that he's not fit to be impartial in matters involving your employer's interests, which overlap with Reed Capital's development plans. The rest of the meeting involved reviewing courthouse layouts, establishing emergency contacts, and practicing with the recording device. By the time Karoline left 2 hours later, her head was swimming with information, but her determination had only grown stronger. That night, sleep eluded her. She tossed and turned, playing out various scenarios in her mind. What if Judge Harmon saw through their plan? What if Reed Capital somehow knew they were being investigated? What if she made a mistake that ruined the entire operation? When her alarm finally buzzed at 6:30 a.m., Karoline had barely slept 4 hours. She dragged herself to the shower, hoping the cold water would clear her mind. It helped. A little. She dressed carefully in a conservative navy suit, professional but forgettable, the kind of outfit that wouldn't draw attention in a courtroom. She clipped the special pen to her notepad and practiced removing it naturally, as if she were just going to take notes. At 9:15 a.m., she parked in the courthouse garage and texted, "Tanya, arriving now." The reply came seconds later. "Agents in position, remember, just observe." The courthouse felt different today. What had once been simply an imposing building now seemed filled with potential danger. Karoline moved through security, hyper-aware of the special pen in her jacket pocket. The security guard barely glanced at it as it passed through the scanner, alongside her keys and phone. Courtroom 7B was already half full when she arrived. She recognized the Reed Capital legal team, 3 men in expensive suits, their briefcases arranged precisely on their table. On the opposite side sat a middle-aged woman and an older man, presumably representing the Riverside Apartments tenants. Their table was cluttered with folders and papers, suggesting a less organized approach. Karoline chose a seat in the middle row, not too close to the front, but not hiding in the back either. She arranged her notepad and regular pen on her lap, keeping the special recording pen clipped to her jacket pocket for now. At exactly 10 a.m., the bailiff called the court to order. Judge Harmon entered, his black robe flowing behind him. His face showed no reaction as he scanned the courtroom, until his eyes landed on Karoline. For just a split second, his step faltered. A flash of something. Surprise, anger, fear. Crossed his face before he regained his composure and continued to the bench. Good, Karoline thought. He recognizes me. The case began with opening statements. Reed Capital's lead attorney spoke eloquently about property rights, economic development, and the company's generous relocation package for current tenants. The tenant's lawyer countered with emotional appeals about community displacement and the lack of affordable housing alternatives. Judge Harmon listened to both sides, his expression neutral. Karoline began to worry that perhaps they were wrong. Maybe he wasn't biased after all. But then the questioning began. When the tenant's attorney tried to introduce evidence about Reed Capital's history of similar evictions, Judge Harmon interrupted. "Counselor, stick to the case at hand. Previous business dealings are irrelevant." Yet minutes later, when Reed Capital's attorney mentioned the company's proven track record of revitalizing neighborhoods, the judge nodded approvingly and allowed the testimony to continue. It was subtle, nothing that would raise eyebrows from casual observers. But Karoline noticed. She carefully unclipped the recording pen and began taking notes with her regular pen, making sure the special one remained exposed to capture every word. An hour into the proceedings, Judge Harmon called for a 15-minute recess. As people stood and stretched, Karoline remained seated, continuing to write in her notepad. From the corner of her eye, she saw Judge Harmon exit through a side door, followed seconds later by one of the Reed Capital attorneys. Without thinking, Karoline stood and moved toward the door. It led to a narrow hallway with several doors, presumably to the judge's chambers and conference rooms. She hesitated, knowing she was supposed to only observe in the courtroom. But this might be her only chance to catch an inappropriate private meeting. She quietly pushed the door open and stepped into the hallway, keeping the recording pen in her hand. Voices drifted from behind a door labeled Conference B at the end of the hall. "Can't believe she's here," Judge Harmon was saying, his voice tight with anger. "Does she suspect something?" The other voice must be the Reed Capital attorney. "How should I know? But the timing is suspicious, right after she was snooping around court records. You need to shut this down, Richard. We've invested too much. To let some nosy press secretary ruin everything. I'll handle it. The ruling will go your way, just like we planned." Karoline's heart pounded so loudly she feared they might hear it through the door. She had just captured exactly what they needed. Direct evidence of collusion between Judge Harmon and Reed Capital. Suddenly, the door handle turned. Karoline panicked and ducked into the nearest room, a small supply closet filled with legal binders and office supplies. She left the door open just a crack, enough to see out without being noticed. Judge Harmon and the attorney walked past, too engrossed in their whispered conversation to notice the slightly open closet door. As soon as they turned the corner, Karoline slipped out and hurried back to the courtroom, her hands shaking with adrenaline. She returned to her seat just as the bailiff called the court back to order. The special pen felt like it was burning, a hole in her pocket. She had gone beyond her instructions, potentially risking the entire operation. But what she'd captured could be the smoking gun they needed. Judge Harmon returned to the bench, his face a mask of judicial impartiality. Only, now knowing what she knew, Karoline could see the fakeness of it, the performance of justice while corruption worked, behind the scenes. The remaining arguments proceeded quickly. Judge Harmon seemed eager to wrap up the case, interrupting the tenant's attorney repeatedly while giving Reed Capital's team free rein to make their points. When it came time for his ruling, he cleared his throat and looked directly at Karoline before speaking. Having considered all the evidence presented today, this court rules in favor of Reed Capital. The economic benefits to the community outweigh the temporary inconvenience to current residents. The eviction notices stand, with residents having 60 days to vacate the premises. The tenant's side of the courtroom erupted in dismayed whispers. The woman representing them stood up, tears in her eyes. "Your Honor, these people have nowhere to go. 60 days isn't nearly enough time. My ruling is final," Judge Harmon cut her off. "Court is adjourned." As people began filing out, Karoline remained seated, continuing to record. Judge Harmon stepped down from the bench but paused near the exit to speak quietly with the Reed Capital attorneys. They exchanged satisfied smiles and brief congratulations, too subtle for most to notice, but clearly captured by Karoline's recording device. Finally, Judge Harmon turned to leave. As he passed Karoline's row, he stopped. "Ms. Leavitt, isn't it? Still pursuing permits for your campaign?" His voice was pleasant, but his eyes were cold. "Just observing today, Your Honor," Karoline replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Interesting choice of cases to observe." He leaned slightly closer. "Some advice? Be careful where you stick your nose. Not everyone appreciates curious young women asking questions about things that don't concern them." The threat was unmistakable, delivered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Karoline felt a chill run down her spine but managed to maintain her composure. "Thank you for the advice, Your Honor. I'll keep that in mind." He held her gaze for a moment longer, then continued on his way out of the courtroom. Only when he was gone did Karoline realize she'd been holding her breath. She quickly gathered her things and headed for the exit. Once outside the courthouse, she called Tanya from her car. "It's done," she said, her voice shaking slightly with leftover adrenaline. "And I got more than we expected, much more." "Stay where you are," Tanya replied urgently. "We're coming to you." 15 minutes later, Karoline sat in an unmarked FBI van, handing over the recording pen to Mike. Her hands were still trembling. "Went off script," she admitted to Henderson. "I overheard them talking in private. Judge Harmon and the Reed Capital attorney were explicitly discussing their arrangement." Instead of the anger she expected, Henderson's face broke into a rare smile. "Sometimes initiative pays off. Let's hear what you've got." Mike plugged the special pen into a laptop inside the FBI van, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. The small space felt crowded with Karoline, Tanya, Henderson, and 2 other agents all leaning in to listen. The van's interior smelled of coffee and the faint scent of fast food burgers someone had eaten earlier. "Give me a second to extract the audio," Mike said, his eyes fixed on the screen. "This pen records everything in encrypted segments. Better quality than most professional microphones, actually." Karoline's leg bounced nervously as she waited. Outside, life continued as normal around the courthouse. Lawyers hurrying up the steps, couriers delivering packages, tourists taking photos of the historic building. None of them knew that inside this ordinary-looking van, evidence was being gathered that might bring down a federal judge. "Got it," Mike announced. He clicked a few more buttons, then turned up the volume. Judge Harmon's voice filled the van, crystal clear. "Can't believe she's here." The Reed Capital attorney responded, "Does she suspect something?" As the conversation played out, Henderson's expression grew increasingly serious. When they heard Judge Harmon say, "The ruling will go your way, just like we planned," He exchanged a significant look with Tanya. "This is exactly what we needed," Henderson said when the recording finished. "Direct evidence of judicial corruption. Combined with the financial records we've been gathering, we have more than enough for an arrest warrant." "When will you arrest him?" Karoline asked, a mix of excitement and nervousness fluttering in her stomach. Henderson checked his watch. "We'll need to move quickly. If Judge Harmon suspects you recorded him, he might try to destroy evidence or flee." He pulled out his phone and stepped outside the van to make a call. Through the window, Karoline could see his expression, intense and focused as he spoke rapidly into the phone. Tanya squeezed Karoline's arm. "You did amazing work. Most people wouldn't have had the courage to do what you did." "I just wanted justice," Karoline replied. "I never expected it would lead to all this." Henderson returned, his energy palpable. "Arrest warrant is being processed right now. We'll take Judge Harmon into custody before the end of the day." "What about me?" Karoline asked. "What should I do now?" "Go back to work like normal," Henderson advised. "Act as if nothing happened. We'll handle everything from here. Once the arrest is made, we'll contact you about making an official statement." Karoline nodded, but a knot of worry formed in her stomach. "Will my name be made public? I'm concerned about my job at the campaign. They might not want this kind of attention." Henderson considered this. "Initially, you'll be listed as a confidential informant. But if this goes to trial, you'll likely need to testify. There's no way around that." "I understand," Karoline said, straightening her shoulders. "Whatever happens, it was worth it." As she left the van, Tanya walked her to her car. "Be careful, for the next few hours. If anyone from Reed Capital or anyone connected to Judge Harmon approaches you, call me immediately." Karoline spent the rest of the day at the campaign office, going through the motions of her regular work, writing press releases, answering emails, preparing for upcoming events. Every few minutes, she checked her phone, waiting for news about the arrest. The hours dragged by, each minute feeling like an eternity. At 4:37 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text from Tanya. "It's happening now. Turn on Channel 8 News." Karoline grabbed her laptop and rushed to the small break room where there was a TV. A few of her colleagues were already there, watching with confused expressions as breaking news flashed across the screen. "We're coming to you live from outside the county courthouse," a reporter was saying, wind whipping her hair, "where federal agents are currently taking Judge Richard Harmon into custody. Sources tell us the arrest is related to an FBI corruption investigation." The camera panned to show Judge Harmon being escorted down the courthouse steps in handcuffs, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. FBI agents flanked him on both sides, including Henderson, whose expression remained professionally neutral. "Oh my God," one of Karoline's co-workers exclaimed. "Isn't that the judge who threw out our permit application last week?" Karoline nodded, trying to keep her expression appropriately surprised rather than triumphant. "It is. I wonder what happened." "According to our sources," the reporter continued, "the investigation involves allegations that Judge Harmon accepted bribes from Reed Capital, a major real estate developer, in exchange for favorable rulings in cases involving downtown properties." The news cut to footage of FBI agents carrying boxes of documents from Judge Harmon's chambers. Then it showed similar scenes playing out at the Reed Capital offices across town. "This is huge," another co-worker said, eyes wide. "Do you think this means we could get our permit approved now?" "Maybe," Karoline replied, struggling to contain her emotions. "We should probably wait and see how it all plays out." Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Tanya. "You should go home. Reporters will be digging into this story. Better if you're not at the campaign office when they start connecting dots." Karoline made an excuse about feeling unwell and left work early. As she drove home, every radio station seemed to be covering the story. Judge Harmon's arrest was the biggest scandal to hit the city in years. She was just unlocking her apartment door when her phone rang. An unknown number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Ms. Leavitt, this is Special Agent Henderson. Are you somewhere private?" Karoline stepped inside and locked her door. "I am now. Has something happened?" "Judge Harmon is in custody and refusing to speak without..." a lawyer, which is his right. But there's been an unexpected development. Vincent Reed himself was arrested trying to board a private flight to the Cayman Islands. The owner of Reed Capital? The very same. He had a suitcase containing over $2 million in cash, classic flight risk behavior. Henderson's voice had a hint of satisfaction. We've been trying to build a case against him for years. Thanks to your evidence, we finally got him. Karoline sank into her couch, the magnitude of what had happened finally hitting her. So what happens now? Now things get complicated, Henderson replied. The U.S. Attorney's Office is preparing charges. There will be extensive investigations into all of Judge Harmon's past rulings, especially those involving Reed Capital. Some cases may need to be retried, including our permit application. Possibly. That would be up to the courts to decide. Henderson paused. There's something else you should know. The press is already digging into the story. It won't take them long to figure out that a complaint from someone in your campaign office started the investigation. Karoline's stomach tightened. Will I need to make a statement? Not yet, but be prepared. This story is going to get bigger before it gets smaller. Henderson wasn't wrong. By the next morning, Karoline's phone was ringing constantly with calls from reporters. Her campaign manager called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. I need to know exactly what happened, he said, looking directly at Karoline across the conference table. The press is saying someone from our office helped the FBI build their case against Judge Harmon. Taking a deep breath, Karoline told them everything, from the judge's inappropriate behavior in court to her discovery of the corruption and her work with the FBI. When she finished, the room was silent. So let me get this straight, her campaign manager said slowly. You single-handedly exposed a corrupt federal judge, brought down a major real estate developer who's been bullying small businesses and residents for years, and made it possible for our permit to potentially be reconsidered. Karoline nodded uncertainly. A slow smile spread across her manager's face. That's the best press this campaign could possibly get. The next weeks passed in a blur. Karoline found herself thrust into the spotlight as the whistleblower who exposed judicial corruption. There were interviews, press conferences, and constant phone calls from journalists wanting exclusive details. The campaign embraced the positive attention, using it to highlight their candidate's anti-corruption platform. The day of the preliminary hearing for Judge Harmon's case, Karoline sat in the courtroom, a different one this time, with a different judge presiding. Tanya and Henderson sat nearby, their presence reassuring. As the charges were read, bribery, corruption, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, Karoline watched Judge Harmon's face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed look of a man whose world had collapsed around him. When he turned and saw her in the courtroom, recognition flashed across his face, followed by something that might have been shame. Outside the courthouse afterward, reporters surrounded Karoline, shoving microphones toward her face and shouting questions. One voice rose above the others. Ms. Leavitt, how does it feel to be responsible for bringing down a corrupt judge? Karoline thought carefully before answering. This isn't about me. It's about justice. Judge Harmon betrayed his oath and the public's trust. The real heroes are the FBI agents who built the case and the prosecutors who will see it through. She paused, then added, and the everyday people who were harmed by these corrupt dealings. The tenants facing eviction, the small businesses pushed out of downtown, the people whose lives were affected by biased rulings. This victory belongs to them. Later that evening, Karoline sat on her apartment balcony, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of gold and pink. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tanya. Just heard from the DA's office. Judge Harmon's lawyer is discussing a plea deal. He's giving up names, other judges, city officials, developers. This is bigger than we thought. Karoline smiled. What had started with a judge's insult had revealed a web of corruption that had been strangling the city for years. Now that web was unraveling, thread by thread. Her phone buzzed again, this time a news alert. She opened it to find her own face staring back at her from the screen beneath a headline that read, Whistleblower's courage leads to major corruption arrests. She put the phone down and looked back at the sunset. The city looked different now, somehow brighter and full of possibility. There would be more challenges ahead, testimony to give, pressure to face, a campaign to run. But for the first time in weeks, Karoline felt at peace. She had stood up against injustice and won. Sometimes she thought all it takes is one person refusing to be silenced to change everything.